Should we mention 1.5 million homes? We've mentioned AI. There's our other box to tick. I feel like we are obligated to mention it every single week.
For those that play Construction Disrupted Bingo, there's your 2 winners straight away.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Adobe Acrobat.
Ryan, really quick question. Testing
Go on.
your industry/roofing knowledge here. Is a flat roof flat?
By definition, I guess it has to be. Although, no, because there's going to have to be a slight gradient for drainage and water runoff.
Yeah. If we were using sound bites and snippets, you'd get a round of applause there. But as we found out a few episodes ago, they don't come through for some bizarre reason. Only me and Ryan would hear it. So Ryan would get the round of applause, but anybody listening wouldn't hear that round of applause. So yes,
No.
correct. The only reason that I'm asking you that is because I was doing some training yesterday through roofing. And yeah, there's a certain pitch that needs to be on a flat roof unless you're going to get pooling water. So
There you go.
hey, there you go. Knowledge, absolute knowledge. We're here to bring the goods.
And even if anyone stops listening and turns off now, and I wouldn't blame them, but there you go. You've at least learned one useful thing, hopefully, while listening to this. How's the rest of your week been, training notwithstanding?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. Fighting off the small children illnesses and bugs and things that seems to be flying around. And some holidays are looming, so there's a lot of shouting, screaming, crying, laughing, joking, all those things thrown into one household. So it's fun times.
Yeah,
Yourself?
yeah, identical over here. The how many days till summer holidays is kind of the mantra at the minute. For different reasons, kids looking forward to it, and us less so. But that's about the way of it, isn't it?
Yeah, very true, very true. And by way of it, let's get stuck into our 3 articles and 3 headlines that we're going to cover today. With number 1 being investment sentiment in UK infrastructure is improving despite geopolitical instability, which we mention every single episode, from a survey, and this is via specification online. So investor sentiment, it looks like it's on the up for the UK. Do you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, well, as it should be, I guess. If you think of the nature of these infrastructure projects, I feel like we talk about infrastructure pipeline or mega projects or something in that ballpark every couple of weeks. So anyone that's been subscribed to this and following this shouldn't be massively surprised, I don't think. I say that only because with geopolitical things like the Ukraine conflicts that have gone on for years now, but the nature of these projects and how long they are in planning and delivery stages and so on means that you probably see several conflicts, sadly, over the life of an airport expansion, for instance, or a new piece of rail infrastructure like an HS2. So yeah, and again, as we spoke about off mic, unless you've been living under a rock, you will have noticed the news coming out of the US and Iran about a potential peace deal there and the Strait opening back up. And again, we were talking about it. Several economists in the sector have said that if theoretically you could get the Strait open by June, then the damage to the UK shouldn't be that sort of pronounced. We've spoken about ONS data being positive. Yes, the PMI, but that's sentiment related. PMI hasn't been great. But infrastructure, hundreds of billions in pipeline, more than 700 billion in pipeline, a government that has clearly committed to this as almost a proxy for getting the wider economy going. Not surprising to me, just the size of the jump here. So to go back to the piece, this is a survey that's come from the Global Infrastructure Investor Association. So they've looked at territories in Europe and North America, kind of looking at sentiment on a quarter by quarter pulse index within each of those territories. Where on the index, 0 is neutral, and then that can go to -5 in extremely unfavorable or +5 extremely favorable. UK, going back to quarter 4 of 2024, was at 0. And there's only one other nation that was worse performing, actually, in Mexico, over in the North American market. UK far and away, along with Poland, the poorest performers in terms of sentiment in Europe. But the steepest, we talk about hockey stick quite often, don't we, Pete, in terms of these graphs? It's more extreme than that. It's almost at 90 degrees, the level of confidence increase. yeah, we are one of the better performing nations in Europe now. I think there's only Germany ahead of us, and Spain sort of fractionally so, but every other European nation polled. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Again, for context, GIIA members, they're managing 1.6 trillion of infrastructure investment. These are people that are in market, that are responsible for delivering these projects, that have an understanding of where pipeline is, and therefore them having high degrees of confidence is not just a it's not a pithy throwaway thing. How do you feel, and might this impact you? These are people that are at the very forefront of this. So yeah, I mean, along with what we're seeing in mainstream press at the minute about the resolution of that crisis, please God. Yeah, it's a really, really encouraging one, I think, Pete.
Yeah, just to put some numbers onto the board, if you like. Uh, More investors plan to deploy around about 2 to 3 billion in UK
Mhm.
infrastructure over the next year, and this is what they're actually saying. I don't think there's any commitment to this, but it's a very positive signs that they still see the UK as that investment country, um, more so than France, Italy, and the Netherlands, which are mentioned in this article. Um, Share of investors expecting to invest 1 to 5 billion over the next 5 years, which is again a positive thing. But the, I suppose, the fly in the ointment, or just to really put it in context completely, is when it comes to the barriers. It's really interesting because the main barrier that people are citing through this is regulatory complexity, and that's
Mhm.
the biggest barrier. And
Mhm.
it's almost like that's in our own hands,
Yeah.
That's something that we can actually influence when it comes to more, as you started and rightly said, the conflicts in the world. Yeah, powers that be can influence that, but us as individuals can't really. But in a regulatory perspective, we're much closer to influencing that than we are anything else. So it's in our own hands to change it almost. Um,
Yeah, it's I'm with you. It's a very, very complex problem. We talk a lot about things don't need to be diametrically opposed, or we can try and find compromise between things. I read it so often that there has to be a semblance of truth in it. That the UK is a difficult place to get these kinds of things done. I know, again, China, where you have a single party system, and
mhm,
myriad different, it's a different market entirely, but that's often held up as the example of, look how quickly these infrastructure projects and things of this nature can be built, how quickly they can be built, and so on. Why can't we do that? And yeah, regulatory reform is always the thing that's held up. But then on the flip side of that, we've had complaints from people that operate squarely in the UK market, that there's been too much regulatory reform over the past 2 years, and people can't get their heads around the level of change and so on. I guess it depends on what that regulation's there to do. My slight
yeah,
cynicism here would be, we can't forget that the audience for this survey is the investor community rather than those involved in actually the delivery element of the supply chain. So why might an investor want deregulation? And I suspect it's not entirely altruistic. It's not entirely
yeah,
about them wishing to be a better contributor to the UK economy and UK coffers. It may be about, and again, back to that point of diametric opposition, people are entitled to turn a profit on these things, particularly if we are seeking sort of private investment into these things. So I'm not knocking that. I am just,
mhm,
there's a little bit of, it depends on what the regulation's there to do, isn't it? If it better protects people,
yeah,
it better protects the sort of the communities in which these assets exist, then yeah, I'm not for slash red tape for the sake of it. Because I think a completely deregulated market, given what construction is there to do, is a pretty dangerous thing. Um, but I understand the sentiment, and as I say, you hear it so frequently, there must be some truth in it.
and second on that list, which tops the list previously, was political instability.
Mhm.
I see that. I see that as a positive, because if I was to ask you when was the last time we didn't have political instability, we've been struggling with that for quite a while, and we're getting through it, peaks and troughs through those things. But like, as long as my memory takes me back. Yeah, there's been a little bit of political instability some way, shape, or form. So if that's secondary and was top of it, I think we're in a good position to get investors to come in and spend their money with us, really.
Yeah, and you know, it's one of those things, and maybe again, I'm speculating here, but we're going to have to be a bit more grown up about these things. One of my biggest frustrations with HS2, whatever you thought of the purpose of that project or the usefulness of that project, one of the big things was that there was cross-party consensus that held for more than a decade, regardless of who was prime minister, what party happened to be occupying number 10, and so on. Everyone was behind the delivery of it. And we, again, the nature of these infrastructure projects, how long these things take from planning to delivery, and then the life cycle, there needs to be cross-party consensus on these things. So that we need to render that political instability point moot, because it shouldn't matter who has the keys to number 10 and who is in charge of, you know, carrying the red briefcase and signing these things off. It needs to be the you know, we as a nation have a conversation about where that investment needs to go. You know, do we need more airport capacity? Do we need more motorway capacity, rail capacity? You know, net zero is mentioned in there. I know that's a very sort of hot point of debate at the minute within mainstream media. But again, according to investors here, there's positive sentiment towards that. If that's the way that we're deciding to go because of energy security reasons or because of sustainability reasons, that should outlive any one prime minister or any one government and so on. So, yeah, I hear what they're saying. But again, if you are a subscriber to this idea that there are likely to be more hung parliaments, more coalitions and so on, then political instability ain't going anywhere. So we're going to have to be adult, and we're going to have to front up to that and find a way to deliver. And I think if we were talking about a part of the construction supply chain where things were more delivered at pace and faster turnover and shorter lead times, then yeah, absolutely. Some commercial projects, for instance, I'm thinking, you know, fast food outlets that are modular built and thrown up, you know, relatively quickly, or supermarkets or whatever the case may be. Yeah, I can understand investors in those markets being put off by, you know, quick changes in government or changes in decision maker. That shouldn't be a factor here, should it?
Yeah, completely. The time scales you're talking about, it's not a quick fix. It's not a pop up. You know, these are major infrastructure projects that help communities, help the local areas as well. We can't forget the end users of these things either. And there's always going to be a mixture, isn't there, of private investment and public. But the fact still remains that they're seeing it as a good place to invest their money. You, like you said, yeah, there's the payoff, isn't there? And you can't deny them that. Not going to do it for the charitable donation of these things. But if they're willing to invest, you know, they're willing to invest. It's got to be a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Is now a good time to talk Adobe?
Well, go on then, if you have to.
There's a lot in this report. There are so many data points, and there's bits that I've not been able to fully get my teeth into and want to. This steep climb from confidence from quarter four 2024 to now. I want to understand what's happened in that time that has made the UK jump from that point to that point, and where we could get to. So I'm actually going to use Adobe Acrobat Studio to do that. What it's really, really good for is taking lots and lots of data, synthesizing it, and getting down to a clear point. That's my little project for the next week.
And please do check out our partners, Adobe Acrobat, the AI Assistant, PDF Spaces. There's a whole host of other things it can do. It can create presentations, like Ryan was saying, with the link to Adobe Express as well. Check it out. You go from really stats-heavy, detailed reports to the creative element, input and output. It's fantastic.
Yes, from massive infrastructure to massive targets to hit. Should we mention 1.5 million homes? Just to
What's that?
We've mentioned AI. There's our other box to tick. I feel like we are obligated to mention it every single week.
For those that play Construction Disrupted Bingo, there's your two winners straight away.
I fear somewhat for this company, it's going to become a millstone around their neck quite quickly. and again, for the potential hokey cokey coming up in terms of leadership might distract a little bit, but we're going to have to get back to the business of delivery at some point. Again, if things are starting to calm down in the wider economy, and then the Middle East having an impact on that, that's one hurdle, successfully navigated. But based on the numbers I've seen coming out of people like the CPA, for instance, I know they use brick sales as a proxy for new housing developments. We're not getting close at the minute. And so there's quite a few different ideas floating around as to how we might get there. We've spoken about several reports in recent weeks from various think tanks on how that might be approached. Government have got things like new towns. That's now hit a slight stumbling block in several, shall we say, new councils that might not have the same aims as government when it comes to levels of development in their particular patch. Hello to anyone from Enfield Council that's listening. But the Northern Housing Consortium have developed an inquiry called the Renew Inquiry, which is basically it's looking at regeneration in a broader sense for the northern, the north of the country, the north of England, and they're focused on things like town centre regeneration is a big driver for them. I think we've spoken about it several times, Pete. That the state of the high streets and what could those assets be redeployed for, and so on. If greenfield sites are going to be increasingly under scrutiny, and rightly so in many cases, then how do we make better use of land that is more of a suitable profile for those kinds of things? Brownfield development again is a no-brainer. Estate renewal and densification of existing urban areas, so building up as well as out, and their belief is that in doing that, if backed by the right funding mechanisms and planning reforms, which we've already touched upon once today, they believe that they could unlock another 500,000 homes. So that would be a third of the way through that 1.5 target. What are your thoughts on it, Pete?
500 million, a 10-year regeneration fund. It's not much to ask, is it?
No. What's 500 million between friends, eh?
I'm sure we can find that somewhere. 20% for pre-development engagement and stewardship. Mm-hmm. So it's not all just building these houses. Do it right, do it correctly. One other thing that they do highlight in this report is that they're asking, or they're suggesting, recommending, how many words can I say that? To appoint a Minister of Regeneration and establish a national centre for regeneration in the north. So this is heavily northern based, as you'd expect. But my opinion is rightly so. I think we've mentioned once or twice, particularly when we're looking for positive news articles, heavily southern skew there potentially when we are looking at certain regeneration, new builds, mega projects, whatever it might be. And then there's always seems to be this, let's mention the north as well. Can we find one for the north? But this is firmly northern based, and like both of us living in the north, vested interest in this. I can see the potential, particularly with the densification, 100,000 homes in town centres, in maybe the smaller cities in the north that aren't doing as well as others that have had previous investment. So I think if they got this right and they had the right locations, then it's a bit of a no-brainer as long as we can finance it correctly. Yeah, it's a win for me, really.
Yeah, and that seems to be the crucial thing. I mean, from a media point of view, you're always going to lead with the big figure, aren't you? The 500,000 homes thing. When as you've just done there, you start to break down these numbers. 100,000 additional units in urban areas. If you think of the number of major towns and cities that would fall into the north of England, that doesn't seem that unachievable. I think there then has to be some, and it's again, if our town centres aren't as popular as they used to be, and retail is now more online and whatever else than high street, there's going to have to be some creativity there. There's going to have to be some thought on what those environments and those settings look like. I know, again, I think I mentioned it. I was at something with Muse a little while back, and they were talking about some of the work that they do in urban regeneration. And it's normally, to their own words, more unfancied areas, they take a longer term view that, this doesn't need to be viable today. This doesn't need to pay back immediately. This is about community building in hopes that this becomes attractive in the long term. But yeah, if we've got these kind of dead high streets, for want of a better term, what else could they be? What else could they be used for by way of community making? Yeah, I think it's going to require a little bit of creativity and us looking at spaces in a slightly different way than this is retail, this is commercial, this is residential. I think we're going to have to, we're going to have to change our thoughts on that. I will say that one of the things that helps in that respect is that the growth of people wanting to live in urban areas doesn't show any signs of slowing. So yeah, it's building on brownfield sites and existing urban areas, and so further densification. There is very clearly a market for that. As we spoke about Manchester and Architects Journal, wasn't it, that had the focus on that area, and we were spoken about a couple of projects in that neck of the woods as well. That seems to be the poster child for regeneration and urban development in the north of England. And I know we've spoken about it again, that the combined authority are doing more to try and make that spread out into other parts of Greater Manchester. And I suspect the same will be true in other devolved areas, that you might have that kind of flagship city area, whether it might be, the Liverpool for the Liverpool City region, or Leeds for the West Yorkshire conurbation and so on. Maybe it's a case of make those areas work and then, have urban sprawl out from there. But yeah, I think it feels eminently workable on the basis of this plan.
For sure. The interesting thing here, just to note, is this article comes as part of Regen Connect, which is no affiliation to the podcast, but it's a new editorial series running across building, housing today, and building design. So it's that collective, that collaboration. And we spoke about being collaborative within this industry and the importance of it. And that goes right through, to all stakeholders, including the press, which is really cool to see.
Yeah.
Segue. Speaking of collaboration, our final article from PCB Today is all about your stakeholders getting involved earlier within projects, and the headline is early contractor involvement cuts project cost overruns, study finds. This is a really interesting piece because it gets into a huge amount of data, and they actually say that they have got it's one of the biggest pieces that they've done from this perspective, and the data they've gathered is quite extensive. But this is all, to summarize, before I hand it over to Ryan to go into a bit more detail, this is all about saying the sooner you get contractors involved in a project right from the start, everything is everything's a win. The costs, particularly the cost overruns, it reduces compared to getting contractors in just to do the job. If you get them involved earlier, yeah, there's money to be saved.
No, completely. The headline was kind of, when I first read this last week, it's like, well, yeah, so what? Like, of course, collaborate with the experts earlier, and then of course they're going to have more of an impact on these things. It's the scale of the impact and just how pronounced that the impact of contractors is when engaged earlier was the thing that stuck out to me. So one of the it's more than 400 individual projects, I believe, that have been looked at here by 55 contractors, which is it's a massive sample. And what they've done, many listeners will be familiar with the REBA stages, the REBA plan of works. They've looked at those as kind of broad buckets, effectively. What of those stages of the project was the contractor engaged, and then what were the outcomes from that. So at stage 3, project overruns rose from between 8.5% to 17.3% at stage 4, which is so nearly 20% of your budget gone in overruns is just, as an average, is remarkable. But for contractors engaged between stages 0 and 2, they delivered broadly below budget. minus 1.7 to minus 1.6% was typical. So yeah, that was the thing that jumped out to me is are you really going to add on a fifth of your project cost potentially just through a late stage engagement? Yeah, like I say, it absolutely stands to reason that the sooner that you engage with an expert, the more impact they're going to have. But when you put it in those terms, and again, think of the value of those projects that have been analysed here and put a pound sign in front of it mentally. That's not insignificant, for a sector that is working to tight margins and a sector that needs to, show a financial responsibility with these things. I think that's how you sharpen people's focus, isn't it?
Yeah. You talk about the margins and the money to be saved or the money to be gained. Just for people that don't know, I'm not going to run through all 7 stages the REBA plan of works, but broadly speaking, 0 to 2 is more about the defining, the preparation, and the conceptual design of it, and then 3 to 4 is more the technical design and the coordination of those things, and then 5 to 7 is the actual building of whatever it is you're doing. And to put it into context, monetary wise, rather than percentages, if you look at the government's 725 billion pipeline, that equates to 125 billion in avoidable cost risk, which is early engagement could save up to 13 billion. We're not talking small numbers. What could you do with that? So if the recommendations, like, number one, it's quite simple: get your major stakeholders involved early and coordinate and collaborate.
But and in terms of recommendations, because that's where I was going to jump to next, they're the outcomes of this, that they're advocating for being mandatory that by REBA stage 2 on public sector projects that contractors are appointed and involved, particularly where there's a proportionate level of complexity and risk involved, which I think makes sense. And I think where public money is being used, we've seen it with BIM and with other initiatives that much easier to control in that respect. That if you want to win this project, we will ensure that this happens. I think that makes a lot of sense. Mandatory value checks, so contracts are not awarded on lowest price alone, which again is something we've spoken about in recent weeks. Again, I shan't name names, but conversations I've been having with people is that's the feeling, at least, that's happening in market. I've heard stories about framework providers bidding against one another and it being on a cost sort of breaks to the bottom kind of a thing. And again, we touched on it earlier. We know margins are tight, but yeah, that feels like a recipe for disaster. And the other recommendation here: strengthen public sector capability and confidence by providing standard guidance, templates, and training to make early engagement consistent and auditable. So yeah, if there is a procurement skill element to this, if it's not just gamesmanship or any other reason that someone would leave it a little bit later to appoint a contractor on a project, yeah, if it is just a skill barrier thing or a lack of understanding, then make sure that training's mandated. So they all feel eminently sensible to me. And the final thing that I was going to touch on, we've spoken about the need to focus people's attention and, generally speaking, putting a pound sign in front of things. But yeah, this notes, and it's something that you and I have spoken about at length previously. Construction recorded 3,931 insolvencies in 2025, representing the highest proportion of any UK sector and a 22% increase on pre-pandemic levels. And as we touched on last week, I think the news had broken on Zentia, the roofing products provider in the Northeast, going under. I think there was 170 jobs lost there. And the big news last week was Ardmore, the construction arm of that. One of the big sort of main contractors closing down their construction arm. And these things, as we've said, don't just impact the businesses involved, as sad as it is for the people there that lose their jobs. It's the whole supply chain off the back of it. So it's noted in here. I think it's absolutely right that the sooner that you can involve any kind of specialist in the decision-making process, the better. But there's a lot of these businesses that are further down the supply chain that are having to absorb risk from further up because of late-stage engagement, where they could have added value, they could have helped to circumvent issues and everything else if they'd have been engaged and had their expertise listened to a little bit sooner. And instead, there is a system at the minute where that risk is just being passed further and further down, and that's the reason that we're having as many insolvencies as we are. So, Yeah, as well as making projects more efficient, there's a benefit to the entire ecosystem of doing that, which I think is worth noting.
Yeah, there's two cool sound bites as well from Simon Arnott, managing director, Construction North at Morgan Signal, in this article. Uh, and I'll paraphrase these two parts, but uh, early engagement allows contractors and the whole supply chain, as you were suggesting or alluding to there, to drive innovation, challenge assumptions, and add real value through buildability, sequencing, and intelligent solutions. So that's number one. And then the article says he concludes by saying it moves the contractor's role from beyond delivery alone,
Mm.
bringing us on board as a collaborative, long-term partner in shaping successful projects. Yes, he's got a vested interest in saying that. Of course he has. But that just makes perfect sense. You could almost take that and add it to any part of the supply chain in terms of getting them on board earlier.
You took the words out of my mouth, Pete, and it's on the face of it, it's an unrelated issue, but I think it dovetails nicely with that point. This is probably going to be my takeaway as well, so I'll get ahead
Go
of it
for
a
it.
little bit. This need for certainty within the supply chain. If we are working to razor thin margins, and we can't change the economic model to any great degree, what we need to do is work together to make sure that everyone in supply chain has as much certainty as possible. And the point I was trying to land was, we've spoken about skills gap, and this kind of, on the face of it, this really weird challenge between, we need all of these people, but we can't get projects going, and no one wants to directly employ them, and so on. But perhaps if there is more certainty, the projects have a long-term partner that is here to see this thing right the way through, we can provide a bit more of a solid employment base. I guess we've spoken about this high demand for further education colleges, clear demand for specific apprentice roles, but then there not being a pathway to then employ these people. Maybe this is that. Maybe there's a top-down thing, and I guess my takeaway for the week is, what can we each do to provide a bit more certainty for those above and below us within the supply chain, both in terms of payment, in terms of ongoing opportunity, and so on. You think of the investors in our first story that want to understand, what return am I getting? When will this asset be complete, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the very bottom end of that, your tier 2, tier 3, your product manufacturers, the people looking to be employed in sector. Where are these projects coming from? When are we getting paid? And can I afford to hire this person? It all comes from the same place of certainty. And if we can stop being so combative and, fighting each other for poorer and poorer margins because we're racing to the bottom, instead, if we can kind of work together on that, then I think it has to be to everybody's benefit ultimately.
I'm going to dovetail on the back of that, if you don't mind, and just say that throughout all three stories, you could look at them and read them and go, yeah, but they've got a vested interest in that. That's why they're saying that, like you said at the very start, and rightly so, 100%. But we've all got a vested interest in this. We've all got a vested interest in the built environment, in construction, making sure this industry works for everybody. So completely, you have to read these things and go, they're going to say that, or like we covered a few weeks ago with van insurance and where that's coming from and things like that. Hang on, this is a bit weird. Oh, get it. It's an insurer that's done this research. Vested interest, but you'd hope there's that level of competency and ambiguity that they can provide that makes them step away and do this, hoping they get the right results. And even if they don't, they'll share something that looks positive. But if you dig into the detail, you can really work out what's working and what isn't. So yeah, everyone's got a vested interest, but as long as that's taken with the right sentiment and done for the right reasons, we all benefit from it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And everyone's busy. It's a stressful environment. If you don't have the time to pull these things apart and get behind it and understand the sentiment, subscribe to a podcast that's going to do that for you. It's a wonderful time-saving thing.
Yeah, after when I click end recording, we'll talk about which ones we should be listening to.
But
Right. I'll see you next week, and enjoy listening to construction podcasts that deliver weekly news on a regular basis.
I will. Bye bye.